when did you start noticing, or did you know ahead of time, a connection to the occult or the maybe the religious side of this?
Uh, so I mean, growing up,
Yeah,
it's everywhere.
yeah.
My family specifically were all Guadalupanos growing up. Guadalupanos are
Hmm.
basically acolytes of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And if you look into it a bit deeper, they're basically holdouts from the Aztec Empire that said we were going to convert, but on our own terms.
Okay.
That's what Guadalupanos are in a way.
Hmm.
If you look at the Virgin of Guadalupe, what she really is an Aztec fertility goddess
Huh.
that was adopted by the Catholics, which is exactly what the Catholics do and have been doing across the world for centuries. There were skeletons around family altars when I was growing up, and very much Santa Muerte was there growing up as well. It was just something that I grew up with, cultural.
Hmm.
Um, then later on, when I went into the unit, I figured out that most of the guys that I was working with were all Santa Muerte practitioners.
Hmm.
That was like a part of the whole culture that we
Hmm.
had. Some, at least that in the small unit that I was a part of, it was very much used as a like a psychological warfare aspect, I guess, or they would very much kind of have it as a memento mori type thing, and it was
Hmm.
a very much like a unit thing. So Santa Muerte was very much a faith practice amongst group members and also criminals. We would hit houses and we would find these giant Santa Muerte statues in rooms, sometimes with pictures of her command structure on the bottom of them with some sort of witchcraft being cast on them.
Yeah.
Mexico is a very spiritual place. It's one of the most Catholic countries in the world. And the amount of the influx of occultist practices coming in from all sorts of places into Mexico has always been like a main factor.
Hmm.
Some of the darker stuff, though, that you see is in Santa Muerte, which is easy. It's very easy to point at as like a demonic, evil looking faith practice. But realistically, when you look at it, it's a veneration of life and death. It's a duality goddess. That's what it is, Santa Muerte. The first exposition that most people got to Santa Muerte was through Breaking Bad.
Hmm.
That's the first time most people saw a statue of death. So the cartel specific evilness of it probably comes from the first exposition you got to Santa Muerte as a culture.
Hmm.
But realistically, it's one of the most benign ones. I really don't see a
Yeah.
lot of there's an absolute revulsion of blood sacrifice and or human sacrifice in any of it
Hmm.
because it's a life and death, the duality spirit practice, and again I grew up in it, so I would
Hmm.
know. um, it's been deformed and used in ways after now.
Hmm.
The first public form of Santa Muerte was after the year 2000. Before that, everybody would venerate or worship it in your houses. It would be something you would talk about. It was a middle finger to the church for some.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And but then you progress in time and you get to the 90s when cartels started kind of formalizing and solidifying, and you get the phenomenons of the narco satanicos, the Satanist cartels, the narcos, the Satanist narcos. Um, I don't remember his name right now off the top of my head, but there's a famous case of this of a Mexican American individual that had exposition to Afro-Caribbean palo, which is basically a form of folk magic practice coming out of Africa, but that settled in the Caribbean. It utilizes a lot of blood sacrifices, body parts, bones, and stuff like that to create these things called ngangas, which are basically vessels that they use to capture a spirit, is what they call them.
Hmm.
At some point in the 90s, a very known occultist started basically getting famous for creating some of these ngangas for some cartel forces. And a lot of these cartel groups became really successful and rich afterwards. So there was a belief in it that started kind of like really permeating throughout the culture. I think he abducted and murdered an American and used his brain in an Nganga that got him into a lot of trouble. And he died in a shootout with authorities in Mexico. But I think that's the first time we started getting a glimpse of some of these cross-pollination of cartels realizing the power of true belief and or the power of some of these occult practices. And I mean, a witch told me this, a Mexican bruja de rancho, as we call them. Uh, Black magic at its core is just a form of weaponized psychology. The curse doesn't work if you don't know about it. And I think a lot of these organizations start to figure this out and started adopting some of these practices as a form of psychological warfare. We see the Templar Knight cartel guys basically made a saint out of their head, a leader. He was supposedly killed by government forces, and then he showed up alive, so that's his miracle. And he was finally killed for real. But there's still sites that venerate him as a saint. There's pictures of him, in crusader garb with a sword and stuff like that, and people watch his gravesite still as a saint. I'm pretty sure that when old Chapo Guzman dies in custody at some point in the future, if you don't let him go, because I know that the Mexican government is trying to negotiate his release. I'm sure that when he dies, he's going to be named a saint. There's already statues of him being sold as saint statues in Sinaloa.
Wow.
So and of course the whole proliferation of some of these Afro-Caribbean spiritual practices that have been used and corrupted by some of these organizations have led into videos of people being seen eating human hearts out there, or having the new initiates into a group partake in cannibalism as a sign of fidelity and capability and manlyhood.
Wow.
I think that's where the aspects of the occult kind of live in this conflict. I've talked to many people about the whole terrorist definition aspect of this, including some members of Congress. They want to figure out if these organizations meet what you would consider the definition of a terrorist organization. And I think the only thing that Americans have it to equate it to are Islamically motivated terrorists. And there's a lot of people arguing that these criminal forces in Mexico don't meet that definition because of religious or other aspects. I think they not only meet that definition, they add a few other elements to that definition that Americans should actually be taken into consideration. If anything, they're an evolution of that threat that the Islamic motivated terror organizations pose to the United States. I mean, this is an organization that outnumbers any single terrorist organization you probably ever faced as a country. Number one. They're transnational. They're in the U.S. already. So it's not only if you do declare them terrorist organization, it's going to be a domestic terrorist organization as well, as well as a foreign terrorist organization. It's both. It's not like Al-Qaeda that's based out of there somewhere. This is an organization that has ties and a foothold in places like Chicago, Los Angeles, Oklahoma, Texas, Arizona, around New York. So it's not going to be some foreign enemy. It's an interesting aspect that occultism has been attempted to be utilized around this definition. It does have something to do with it, but we shouldn't make the mistake of demonizing a whole group of people in Mexico who are very desperate, who find comfort in the faith practices that they have been inherited. Just like I wouldn't go into a powwow and say anything about people dancing around and venerating aspects of their spirituality, I probably wouldn't have the balls to go to somebody who has a Santa Muerte statue at their home and say anything about it, because it's a faith practices they have that aren't hurting anybody. But there are elements being utilized by certain organizations that come and stem from some of these occult practices.
Yeah.
They're very much being weaponized. That's kind of the best way to kind of put that.